Are you ready? Seriously, are you ready? Tonight is a big night. It is the night that we have all been waiting for. It is the event that dozens and dozens of people have been begging to see for years. I don't know about you guys, but I have not been this hyped up about a big event since the WNBA No-Star game last month. It is going to be extremely difficult to top that star-studded affair. Unknown pretend basketball player A going up for a dunk and hands touching nothing but net. Wanda Whiskers mesmerizing the crowd with her efficient use of the complimentary razor courtesy of Gillette. And who could forget the long-awaited return of Bob Greiner? Bobby G managed to make WNBA history by becoming the first dump diver to successfully dunk a basketball. Now, sure, she had the benefit of the trampoline, but who cares? I have a feeling, though, tonight's special event, it is going to be able to top the WNBA No-Star game. But just like most of his past fights, this event is nothing but a spectacle. It is a cash grab. Later on tonight, live from the American Airlines Center in Dallas, Jake Paul, he's going to take on Nate Diaz in a fight that no one will remember by tomorrow. I have no problem calling out the WNBA or the activists representing America in the World Cup. I have no problem going after my favorite Yentas on The View. I don't mind dumping all over ESPN or CNN. Matter of fact, it gives me great pleasure to shit on the worldwide leader in woke. But I feel a bit differently when it comes to Jake Paul and his pretend boxing career because I know that he takes this very seriously. I know for Jake Paul, this is all real to him. I think in his mind, he is helping to save the sport of boxing. The problem is, I don't feel like most other people see it the same way. I look at boxing the same way I look at the UFC. Both sports very similar to the WWE, except in boxing and UFC, they are hitting you for real. You put two guys in a boxing ring with no history, no backstory, no grudge to be settled. You put two guys in a boxing ring where one has a visible competitive advantage over the other. No one cares. No one is paying to see that fight. Sure, boxing purists will get off on it. People who enjoy the technical aspects of MMA, they can watch Bob wrestle around with Rob. But me, people like me, the casual fan, we could give a fuck less. You don't have to take my word for it. Go look at the biggest boxing and UFC pay-per-views and see what they all have in common. Every single one of them were able to capture the mainstream interest. Jake Paul, he has been able to do that once. His first fight against Ben Askren drew 1.5 million buys on pay-per-view. His next 3 fights, they combined for 1 million pay-per-view buys. Now, to his credit, Jake Paul has tempered his expectations a little bit. Instead of predicting an astronomical buy rate, instead of claiming that he has the drawing power to convince 1 or 2 million people to spend $80 or $90 on what should be a painfully boring fight, Jake Paul is predicting 500,000 buys. In other words, Jake Paul is predicting embarrassing failure. Let me show you how seriously his opponent, Nate Diaz, is taking this fight. It didn't take me 5 seconds to realize Nate Diaz is only in this for the payday. In his prime, Nate Diaz, he was a bad motherfucker. During his promos in the UFC, this dude reminded me a lot of Jake the Snake Roberts. Nate Diaz, he had this aura about him that said, you don't want to fuck with me. But this dude is 38 years old, well past his prime. Yesterday, they were doing the typical Friday afternoon face-off, that one last push to convince people to pay for this spectacle. Now, I don't consider myself to be a follower of UFC. I only watch the big fights, but I did follow Nate Diaz throughout his UFC career. I don't think I have ever seen him this unmotivated before a fight. Listen to this uninspiring promo, but pay close attention to his physique. You tell me if Nate Diaz looks like he's ready for a fight. Roll the film.
Hey, shout out to everybody for the love and support. Appreciate everybody coming out. And no matter how the fight goes, let's don't forget, this mother can't really fight.
Really? Really? That was supposed to convince me to buy this fight? If that's the best you have to offer, I'll gladly keep my $80 and watch the new season of The Lincoln Lawyer on Netflix tonight. What the hell has Nate Diaz been doing the last couple of months? I know one thing he hasn't been doing: training. He looks like he just finished lunch with the Lizzo at Burger King and he walked across the street to collect his paycheck. I don't mind paying $100 to watch a good fight. If you give me Mayweather McGregor with months of promotion, I'm paying to watch that fight. 10 or 15 years ago, you give me Brock Lesnar versus The Field, I'm paying to watch that fight. Anything involving Mike Tyson in his prime, I'm watching that fight. Hell, Nate Diaz in his prime, I'll happily pay to watch that fight. You know how many Jake Paul fights that I've paid to watch? 0. I watched a couple of his fights after the fact. I watched his last fight with Tommy Fury, his only loss. The fight ended in a split decision. But let me ask you something. If Jake Paul can't beat a reality TV star whose biggest credit is being on some show called Love Island, why in the hell would I pay my money to watch him fight? I don't pay to watch amateurs. I pay to watch professionals. Just because you are being paid a lot of money to do something, it doesn't make you a professional. CNN paid Donnie Lemon millions of dollars every year to be a journalist. Does anyone consider Don Lemon to be a professional journalist? ESPN pays Mina Kimes nearly $1 million every year to be a pretend NFL analyst. Does anyone think Mina Kimes is qualified to analyze the NFL? Last I checked, one of the primary qualifications to be an NFL analyst, you have to have played in the league. Jake Paul is paid millions of dollars to be a boxer, but that does not mean that Jake Paul is a professional fighter. Go watch one of his fights, then go watch that fight between Crawford and Spence last weekend. You tell me which boxers are the professionals. And look, this is nothing against Jake Paul. I respect his hustle. I know that he takes this seriously. I know that this is his dream, and I respect anyone who is willing to chase their dream and make it a reality. But we are 2, maybe 3 years into Jake Paul's boxing career, and he has yet to fight a legitimate boxer. Have you ever wondered why? Have you ever wondered why Jake Paul fights former UFC fighters who are closer to 50 than they are to 20? Have you ever wondered why he fights some wanker that's looking for love on a fictional island? One of the things that sells boxing fights is mystique. Floyd Mayweather was a painfully boring fighter. He was a defensive boxer who would tire his opponents out. It's a great strategy, but makes for a boring fight. Floyd Mayweather, he was able to make billions of dollars on pay-per-view because he had mystique. People were willing to buy the fight to see if he would finally lose. Floyd Mayweather, he was also brilliant at promoting his fights. Same thing with Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor could talk your ass into the arena. Jake Paul, he has not faced a legitimate boxer because he was trying to build up his mystique. Problem is, no one bought into the gimmick. People saw right through it. I don't think Jake Paul wants to be viewed as a spectacle. I don't look at him the same way I look at these other celebrity boxers who have watered down the sport of boxing to collect a quick paycheck. I feel like Jake Paul believes that he is legitimizing the sport of boxing. I think he believes that he is helping to save the sport, but I just don't think there is anything that anyone could do at this point. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. Boxing is dead. That doesn't mean that a promoter can't catch lightning in a bottle and sell 1 million pay-per-views once every few years. But in terms of mainstream appeal, boxing is dead. It is over. If you don't believe me, just look at what happened last weekend. Crawford Spence. In the world of boxing, this was one of the most highly anticipated fights in years. Be honest. How many of you guys knew about this fight before last weekend? The weeks leading up to the fight. How many of you knew about it? How many of you heard about it? How often did you see this fight hyped throughout the mainstream media? This was a battle of the unbeatens. In the boxing world, they were claiming that this fight was going to be on the level of Mayweather-Pacquiao from 2015, which was another Floyd Mayweather fight that I spent $100 for and was ultimately disappointed. Crawford Spence. Biggest fight in boxing in almost a decade. 650,000 pay-per-view buys. 650,000. That is awful. Now keep in mind, Jake Paul, he is predicting that he's going to sell 100,000 less. This dude is supposed to be a mainstream star, and you mean to tell me you can't outdraw two unknown boxers? 3 years ago, Mike Tyson, Roy Jones Jr., they sold 1.6 million. They're in their 50s. Look, I wish boxing was not in this predicament. There is no other feeling in sports like that feeling that you get before a big fight. Dana White, UFC, they are brilliant at hyping up big fights, but they've got to have the stars to be able to do it. Boxing promoters, they're brilliant as well, but again, they've got to have the stars. And more importantly, the stars have to have legitimacy. 7 fights into his career, and I know that's not very many, but 7 fights into his career, and Jake Paul, he's still not viewed in the mainstream as a legitimate fighter. Seriously, if Jake Paul beats Nate Diaz, would you consider him to be a legitimate boxer? Nate Diaz is a MMA fighter. Hell, he's past his prime MMA fighter. Jake Paul is supposed to win this fight. That's why he's heavily favored. God forbid he loses, which I doubt will happen. But if Jake Paul wants to be viewed as a legitimate boxer, he has to fight legitimate boxers. I think one of the reasons that he doesn't do that, besides the fact that he would probably lose the fight, there's not any stars in boxing for him to face. There aren't any boxers available to draw money with him on pay-per-view. But give me your thoughts. This is coming from me, a casual boxing fan. I'm sure some of you guys are boxing purists who know a hell of a lot more about boxing than I do. Do you think Jake Paul is good for the sport of boxing? Or do you think he further illegitimizes the sport? Give me your prediction. Jake Paul, Nate Diaz. Will they sell 500,000 on pay-per-view? I think that number is doable. I don't see them exceeding it, but I think it's doable. What about you? Sound off in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Click the notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys tomorrow.